click that. So everything after this point should be live.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Jones. I serve as chair as the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas BSRB. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Leslie Seawester.
Here.
Joyce Baptiste.
Here.
Jardine Coleman.
Here.
Rebecca Culver Turner. I see you. Your mute must have not come off.
Here.
Thank you. I know that the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we're conducting this meeting publicly, remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the Kansas Open Meeting Act. On February 16th, 2022, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website, and an agenda and other meeting materials are posted on the board's website. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda.
Great, thank you very much. We'll start with our first item of business, which is the agenda approval. I will make one note just to keep in mind on the agenda. We do have the training for advisory committee members on there. And if we sort of run short on time, we may defer that item to the next meeting, just depending on how much content we get through. Are there any other comments or suggestions on the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Jardine. Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Joyce. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? Thank you. We will move to the review of the minutes from last meeting from February 11th. Does anyone have any comments, edits, suggestions? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thanks, Joyce. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jardine. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. David, we'll move to you for your report.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to highlight a few items concerning the BSRB, some legislative updates, and also some items from the last board meeting on March 14th. So first, a couple items concerning BSRB operations. We are still under the governor's directions that were primarily under the pandemic. Some of those have been relaxed. For example, there was previously an order for state employees in state office buildings to wear masks at all times, and that has been optional. But the other directions from the governor's office during the pandemic are still in effect for us since we are in a state building. So we are still limited to not being able to have in-person meetings, but we will continue to monitor that, and we will provide direction to you when that is relaxed as well. So most staff members are working in the office every day. We do have two investigators who are using a telework pilot program that we implemented in the fall, and we got approval for that from the Department of Administration. And so they are working remotely 2 days per week, and they're in the office 3 days per week. So right now we're monitoring that and looking to expand that if it shows that it can be a good productive thing for the office. In terms of some legislative updates, so there are certain deadlines for the legislature. The legislative session started in January, and as they have bills passed through the legislative session, there are certain self-imposed deadlines and some that are in statute. There is a date called turnaround, which is where bills that have passed out of the committee of origin have to get through the chamber floor. And so there's also a date called drop dead day, which has to do with bills that have gone through the second chamber. They have to get through the second chamber's floor. And then they have a break period of 3 weeks before they come back for the last remaining items. And that's where they are currently at right now. They ended their main session and they're on about a 3-week break, and they'll come back for a period called omnibus, which is where they will settle any remaining items. One of the items they did right before they left was the appropriations bill. That was House substitute for Senate Bill 267, and it was passed by the legislature on Friday, April 1st. And last I saw on that, it was still awaiting action by the governor. The governor does have the ability to do line item vetoes, and then the legislature can come back and then can discuss those vetoes if they so choose. The budget for the BSRB is included in that, so we will wait to see, but I don't expect there to be any changes. Additionally, another update is that the BSRB bill has passed the legislature. It's very exciting, but I've provided a few updates to you about the BSRB bill during the spring. In January, we requested a bill introduction, which had 3 recommendations by the board. That was Senate Bill 387. It had a recommendation for the social work profession, one for the addiction counselor profession, and also one for the licensed psychology profession. The licensed psychology recommendation had to do with continuing education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. When Senate Bill 387 was heard in the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, they amended the bill to remove that item from the legislation. And after they removed that from Senate Bill 387, they passed it out of committee favorably as it was amended. However, they did not pass that on the Senate floor prior to that turnaround date, which meant that the bill essentially died. So under normal circumstances, we would have to try to bring another bill next session. But through some additional work, we were able to work with the House to get them to introduce that amended Senate Bill 387 as a new House Bill 2734. And we were able to get it expedited for a hearing in the House Health and Human Services Committee. So as I mentioned, that was the amended Senate Bill 387 that was put into the text of House Bill 2734. So it included just the recommendation on social work and the recommendation on the addiction counselor. That bill was passed out of the House committee, and then it was passed by the House chamber. Before they left, in the last week in March, the legislature had a number of conference committees that were meeting to work out differences between bills. They worked on some health bills in the 2 health committees. placed the contents of House Bill 2734, the BSRB bill, into Senate Bill 453. And they went ahead and passed that bill. So that bill has passed by both the House and the Senate. Really excited about that. And now we're just waiting on action from the governor. Basically, the bill is put into written form, and then the governor has 10 days from when she is presented with the bill to either sign it, or if she takes no action, it'll go into the law, or the governor can veto the law. And if she does that, then the legislature can consider the veto when they return. But we're really excited. Should the bill go into effect, it does take effect upon publication in the statute book or in the Kansas Register. The initial implementation date was publication in the statute book, which would have been about July 1st, but it was moved up. So it would take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register, which is a weekly publication by the Secretary of State's office. So that'll let us move forward on those items a little bit quicker. One item that was added to the conference committee report prior to it concluding. So there is a Fort Hays State social work program. It's an online program, and it is currently in candidacy for accreditation. It's about a 3-year process for the accreditation. And there are students who are coming through that program right now who are finishing the program, but the program is still some time away from the accreditation. They anticipate it'll be fully accredited in February of 2023. And so advocates for that program had approached members of the legislature and requested that they put in language that the BSRB would recognize those graduates as coming from an accredited program. So that language was added to the bill. This is something that the board is going to be talking about at the next board meeting in May. I think it's not just relevant to these students, but it's relevant to other programs. The main issue with the Fort Hays State Social Work online program is that for the social work profession, it says when someone applies for licensure, it asks, did they come from an accredited program? Are they accredited by the national accrediting body? And if they are, there is one set of standards that apply. And if they don't come from an accredited program, you have to follow certain other standards. And those standards include that 50% of the coursework has to be completed in residence at the facility, which for an online only program would not be able to be satisfied. Now, once that school became accredited, then you would no longer have to meet that in residence requirement. So when it is accredited, it doesn't have an issue with the in residence issue. But while it's in candidacy, that's kind of an area that the statutes and regulations for the BSRB just don't really speak to. So as I mentioned, this will be something for the board to discuss at the May meeting and how to handle situations like this. But for that specific program, the legislature did include a provision in that conference committee report for the online master's program at Fort Hays State to have the BSRB deem those students who graduated from the program as if it was accredited for this fiscal year and fiscal year 22, and also fiscal year 23, which is the one that follows. It's anticipated they'll be fully accredited by February 2023, so it shouldn't matter after that point, but that is what they went ahead and put in the bill. So in talking with members of the legislature, I let them know that the board has not had the opportunity to discuss this type of measure. So the board is not taking a position, not supportive of this being added to the bill, because the board needs to discuss this and weigh in on it. And so that's what the board will have the opportunity to do at the May board meeting. Another legislative update is sub for Senate Bill 34. This is a bill that I talked about a little bit in the spring earlier. This bill has changed a few times. The most recent version would require all agencies to make a report to the Joint Committee on Rules and Regulations every 5 years, indicating whether each regulation is tied to an essential state function and is necessary for the implementation of state law, or if not, it directs that those law or regulations should be revoked. And it also provides an expedited process for revoking regulations. And so it was passed. It was put into another bill, so it was passed as House Bill 2087, and it has been forwarded to the governor for review. A few other updates from the board meeting. So the board of the BSRB did meet on August 14th, 2022. In terms of the board meeting format, as long as the board meetings will continue to stay online, the board meetings will move from a 10 a.m. start time to a 9 a.m. start time. So there is an investigative policy for the BSRB that the Complaint Review Committee follows. It is a document that was put together several years ago, and the document was last modified back in 2009. So I am going through that document and talking with our legal counsel and talking to the investigators, and also letting them know, getting some feedback and comments from them. And I'm going to put together a report for the board with some recommended changes and some items for their discussion, because it's time that we go ahead and revise that investigation policy that's posted on the website. Also on that line, there are instances in the statutes and regulations for the board where the statutes and regulations reference that the board will take certain action or certain jurisdiction is reserved to the board. And in some instances, we take that to mean the full board, and in some it's meant to the BSRB acting on behalf of the board. Sometimes it's delegation to the executive director. Sometimes it's to maybe an advisory committee or a member of the board. And so one thing that I'll be working on with the board this year is going through instances of those references and just trying to clarify which of those should be the full board or which should be delegated. And then if there needs to be more delegation motions to renew those grants of authority, we'll go ahead and take care of those. Additionally, the board recently discussed required trainings for board-approved supervisors and whether there were sufficient opportunities for board-approved supervisors to receive this training. So the board didn't take specific action on that topic, but it did have a good discussion on that topic. Additionally, I was invited to serve as a member of a committee for the SIPAC Commission. That is a multi-state compact for licensed psychologists that Kansas became a part of this year in January. It is the first of the associations that I have been asked to serve on a committee for. So I went to the board to get direction on whether they wanted me to bring those opportunities to them or whether I should follow a different process when I receive opportunities like that in the future. And the board was supportive of me pursuing opportunities like that as long as it didn't interfere with my work for the board. And so I will let you know if I do accept opportunities with different associations. In terms of some future topics the board is planning to discuss, there are other state agencies and there are other agencies similar to the BSRB in other states that use an impaired provider program. And so that will be something the board will be considering and discussing in further detail. Legal counsel from the board from the Attorney General's office is aware of some types of programs that are used in other states or for other agencies, which can be of assistance if you have a practitioner who has an issue with substance abuse or perhaps needs mental health services. And so we're going to have the board have a little bit more information on that topic, and then have the board weigh if they want to pursue a program like that for the BSRB. And then the last item the board may discuss in the future is an approach to telehealth standards. So that's been a topic of discussion, especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the rise of telehealth services. But there are other legislative actions that have been discussed in terms of how to set telehealth standards for practitioners. And so the board may discuss a method to go ahead and look at those standards for practitioners under the BSRB. So that's something for the future discussions on the board. So with that, I think I will go ahead and end my report and happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions, comments? Once again, a lot going on legislatively, and I appreciate your updates and helping the advisory committee understand all the things that are going on, all the moving parts. Okay, thank you for that report. I had a question, maybe this is Leslie or David, but just in terms of follow-up from last meeting, how are the changes progressing with the approved supervisor language and the application?
So I have the changes made and I'll take them to the board. The application, the application has been done.
Okay, all right,
The regulation will go to the board at the next board meeting.
awesome. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Great, okay. Well, we will move on to our new business, which we have quite a bit of discussion to have over our advisory committee membership. Thank you, David, for sending out the materials for us to review. The first thing is kind of looking at and David, feel free to give some direction in terms of how actually, let me pause there. Why don't you go ahead and give some review of how other committees have taken this process on before I jump in.
Sure. So just to kind of set the table on this item. So there is an advisory committee policy for the board, which outlines the terms of advisory committees and the purpose of the advisory committees. So I'll just take a minute to highlight that document. One of the documents in your packet is the advisory committee policy. So I'll just go ahead and read through a couple sections of this, and I think it'll help clarify the process to use. So the BSRB advisory committee is a creation of the board and has the purpose of supporting the board and carrying out its mission to protect the public. Members serve at the pleasure of the board in actions pertaining to informing, licensing, disciplining of those persons regulated by the board are the methods for accomplishing this mission. In terms of the structure of the advisory committee, chairs of the advisory committee are members of the board. If the profession is represented on the board, the chairs of the advisory committee will be a board member licensed in the discipline of the committee and appointed by the governor to represent the discipline on the board. And the other board members appointed by the governor to represent the discipline on the board will serve as members of that advisory committee. And then a public member of the board will also be a member. What you'll be focusing on today is this next group. So for non-board members on the advisory committee states that there will be a minimum of 3 non-board members and a maximum of 10 non-board members appointed to the advisory committee. And then it notes the executive director will be a non-voting ex officio member. And then there's some additional information about the assistant director and licensing manager and assistant attorney general. The terms for advisory committee members are 2 years, and they are appointed by the chair of the BSRB, and they can serve up to 4 terms. Appointments to the committee should be staggered to avoid having too many members on the advisory committee reach their maximum length of service at the same time. And the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will apply also to the advisory committee members, and the chair of the BSRB can remove members. In terms of the selection process for members of the advisory committee, members of the committee may be nominated by anyone, including the public, committee members, members of a professional organization, either the discipline owned or other, or through self-nomination. In reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is a diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. Members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. It also states that the committee as a whole will discuss nominations and reach recommendations on new members. The nominee's resume, a letter stating the reasons why he or she desires to be appointed, and the copy of the board's mission and goals to which the nominee has indicated agreement are reviewed. The chair of the committee will submit the committee's recommendation for new members to the BSRB board chair, and the chair will review the recommendations and may request input before making a decision, which will be announced at the board meeting. So the reason this item is on the agenda today is that 2 of the advisory committee members, Joyce and Rebecca, are going to be reaching their maximum length of service. And we really appreciate all the work that you 2 have done. And so the advisory committee non-board members after that point would drop down to 3 members, Jardine, John, and James. And so based on what the advisory committee policy says, is that you need to have a minimum of 3 non-board members, but you can have as many as 10. And so I went ahead and as I just read, there's some different criteria to look at when evaluating the content of individuals who are interested in applying. At the last advisory committee meeting, we talked about how to go about looking for new advisory committee members and advisory committee recruitment. In the fall, or last fall, a number of the advisory committees went through a recruitment process where they asked me to draft a letter to all licensees and to send it out to indicate to them that the advisory committee was looking for new members, and that they could send me a resume and cover letter if they were interested in joining the advisory committee. And so that is what I did following the last advisory committee meeting in February. And so we had a number of responses back. We did have 8 individuals who submitted materials to be considered to be on the advisory committee. I went ahead and did verify that all individuals who had applied are actively licensed by the BSRB. And additionally, I went ahead and I pulled their city information. So that's not information I had provided to you before, but I do have that information. So you can use that when you're looking at geographic representation across the state. In terms of that, Jardine Coleman, I had you down as being from Manhattan. John Fleeker and James Godby from Dodge City. And then for the 8 applicants, Chris Haben, I had down as Overland Park. Diana Siebel, I had down as from Wichita. Eric Parks, I had down as from Atchison. Julia Harkle Road, I had down as Prairie Village. Marcy Lechtenberg, I had down as Manhattan. And Melanie Wood, I had down as Wichita. Nicole Eitzen, I had down as Hutchison. And the address I had down for Scott Kaminsky was in Louisville, Kentucky. So as I mentioned before, the discussion on advisory committee members is to be had in an open forum. How the other advisory committees have done this is that they've had some discussion back and forth, and then they've reached recommendations, and they can either take a vote or you can do it by consensus. But then when you reach recommendations, those are provided to the chair of the board, and then the chair can request additional input. So
I have a quick question, Mary, sorry. So of the 8 responses that you received, were there any repeats that did not get on to or were recommended last time, Dave?
I can jump in on this one. So the advisory committee members didn't have anyone leaving the committee last year. So they didn't do a recruitment process last year. So they were doing it for the first time this year.
I apologize. I didn't remember that. So thank you.
I think I'd start and just with the materials that were reviewed, did any of the advisory committee members nominate or recommend someone?
I nominated Chris Haben.
Okay.
I nominated Marcy Lechtenberg.
Okay, great. Any others? Okay, I'd like to start the discussion then with those 2 recommendations. And looks like one's Chris Haben, I know, is Overland, and then Marcia Manhattan. I don't know if you want to, if anyone has any comments over the resume, or if you would, either one of you would like to talk a little bit about why you nominated or recommended them for the advisory committee.
Do you want to go, Joyce, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay. It's hard to like catch someone's eye over Zoom. So Chris Haben is the program director for the MSFT program in Kansas City. So he's my colleague. I nominated him because I thought he would be a good faculty representative for the Friends program. I also feel like he's had a lot of board and leadership experience. So he was actually on the advisory board, I think for 2 years before, and then really enjoyed it. But then I believe he became the KSAMFT president. And so he had to choose between the two of those. He's also been the AAMFT president as well. And I biased because I nominated him, but I think he's done a very competent and proficient job within those roles. I think he would be a good asset.
And I certainly know I've worked with him in a few different settings as well, and I certainly would agree that he would be a good advisory committee member here. Other comments or feedback from members of the committee?
I'll just add, I don't know Chris personally, but I know a lot about him professionally. And I know that he has had lots of opportunities to serve and to have his voice heard. And so my only hesitation is there room to give another person an opportunity to be a part of something and to kind of have their voice heard and to start their service resume in this capacity, whereas he maybe is further along in his career. But if I'm doing the math right, we have room to take several people. But that's just something that I just was considering.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jardine. And it looks like from some of the resumes we received, we could do just that too. You know, I agree with you. Other questions, comments?
I'm in an
Okay.
awkward situation because I can't really comment, but I want to follow up a little bit with Jardine and just take a little chance that I can make a side comment that I kind of agree with that. I want everyone to have an opportunity, right? We all do on all advisory boards, but I think that that's a good point that Jardine brought up. We want, you know, someone that maybe could have a different perspective as well, to, you know, have an opportunity that they might have missed because they did not have the opportunity to be on a board before, or have other, you know, placements in other locations or businesses. So thank you for that, Jardine.
Okay. So would we go with a possible recommendation then? We'll kind of flesh these out at the end, but we'll put them on a, okay, come back to list. For my sake, it's easier for me to go person by person. So that would be most helpful for me. Joyce, I'd like to go to your recommendation or your nomination.
Oh,
That and tell us a little bit about, is it Marcia or Marcia?
Marcy.
Thank you.
Yes. So Marcy Lechtenberg is the clinical director of the Couple and Family Therapy Program at Kansas State University here in Manhattan. She has been an instructor and faculty here since 2014. So she directs the clinical practice of all the students, master's and PhD. And so she has she has her pulse in the needs of the students. And I think she'll be a good, she'll contribute well to this advisory board. And she has, she's not served on this board before.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? You know, for one of the things that I think we have to kind of flesh out here too is I'm wondering from a diversity standpoint, if you know, obviously we've got a female representation. Are there any other groups that would add diversity with her background?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? This would be a Manhattan.
Yes, Manhattan. I guess one of the she was raised in a rural community, so that might be geographically a contribution there in terms of diversity.
I do really like the idea So I know that Jardine is in Manhattan too. And I like the idea of having someone from K-State and someone from Friends represented on the board.
I agree with you, Rebecca. I mean, I think you and Joyce have filled a gap that it's a different perspective as people in, you're working with students in training. So I think I even on the last advisory committee before we did this was sort of leaning on the two of you to say, are there people from your settings? Because I do think they contribute a lot to the professional development of folks. So, okay.
It might be too, like the timing of this may not be very helpful. I had just decided to put one name forward for the Friends faculty, and we had some people that were interested, but there's some conflict of interest, and so that's why I just put one name forward for the Friends faculty.
It was the same for me too. I looked at, prioritizing individuals that this position would be meaningful for them, and also in terms of time commitment. And I think being on this board would fit the role that Marcy has as clinical director, and that's the reason why too I only forwarded one nomination.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Can we move forward with putting them on a possible recommendation list? Okay. I'll go next to Diane Seibel, and let's look at her information. We have her listed as a Wichita. I'm not familiar with her, so
So we have it looks like two people from the Wichita area and one in Hutch. So kind of three people in this area.
Yeah. That was one thing Jim had said to me. He was disappointed that there wasn't more from Western Kansas in this applicant. And as David's noting, there is opportunity to add other people on later if there's interest if we feel like there's an underrepresented area. Right now, Jim and John both sort of fill that void, but I think he was hoping to see some other areas.
So
John, I agree we need.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think John, John, David, you had John out of John Fleeker.
Yeah, I had him down at Dodge City.
Yeah, but I think is he Wichita or is
I feel like he is.
Let me double check.
he might have moved service locations or something, but okay. Okay, so something to think about as we're looking through the Wichita applicants.
Yeah, because if he's in Wichita, that would be kind of Wichita heavy. Maybe. I do wonder, I know that there's a lot of positions open, and I was reading the staggering. And I would be curious, and this of course is not up to me, and especially since I'm leaving soon. I would be curious about staggering, maybe doing something next year too, so there's not this huge influx of people coming in this year.
I agree, Rebecca, and I was going to talk to the group about maybe getting at least your two positions looked at, and maybe another, and then because we want to stagger, that'd be 3 people at the same time, or we could select people from this group and maybe stagger dates of service. So that's, David, something I needed to ask you about and make sure, could we start a couple of these people if we liked their resumes in January? But we would need to get your positions more immediately filled.
Yeah, so to the point about John Fleeker, it looks like I do have him down as a Wichita address. So,
Okay, thank you.
and in terms of terms, so the advisory committees generally go on the fiscal year, which would start July 1st. And so you could add someone who would start in January, but they would be serving half of a term. So it would just remove 6 months from their term, basically. So just some options.
Well, in reviewing Diane, I mean, she certainly has a lot of clinical experience, lots of regional experience, state hospital experience. No, not state hospital. She's one of the recovery centers, addiction experience. I think the Greensburg is what caught my attention too. So lots of different work experiences. Does anyone know anything about her personally or professionally? And I don't either.
I've had a couple conversations with her about an ethical concern I had about someone else, not with her.
Okay.
I think her diverse clinical experiences could be helpful to the board.
I don't know if this is like the best decision-making process, but I kind of grouped her and the two other kind of Wichita area people and compared them. And she seemed to have the most experience. Her clinical, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's how we.
Well, it's sort of going back. I think actually grouping geographically is a good method because we don't want to be heavy in one area. And also I'm sensitive to Jardine's comment.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I'm sensitive to Jardine's comment about, are we looking, the highest clinical experience or versus someone who's wanting to have an impact early in their career. And that's really what you're seeing with these applicants that are geographically located in Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry. I always have I throw a wrench in things or have a strange comment, I know, but bear with me. So as we're talking, and I can't comment obviously, but as we're talking, I think of what if there's someone who is a stellar applicant and they live in, a populous area and we're denying them that opportunity. Are we then also somehow, I hate to use the word discriminating or something like that? We have to be aware of our own actions too. I know we have a policy, but my understanding is that it's not set in stone, right? Where we have to make attempts to have those geographical areas. Is that right, David? I'm not speaking out of turn, that we have to make the attempt.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that there should be a broad range of practitioners to help out with, broad range of topics the advisory committees would be dealing with. And some of the things to consider would be things like making sure there's geographic representation and representation as much as possible across license types and some of the other factors that were mentioned there about diversity and other things. And so I think all of those should come into play to help with the discussion, but I don't think any one of those things in particular has to be, the absolute thing. I think they all should be rated as part of the conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't interpreting anything as exclusionary. It's consideration. Yeah.
No, I didn't think that, Mary. I just wanted to throw that out as we were talking. I was thinking of that, because I thought, well, what if all of the 8 responses came from the same area? Then what would the advisory committee do? And, it is a tough, you all are in a tough situation to choose those professionals. But anyway, so that, just throwing that out there. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you.
My comment.
This is a new experience for many of us here. So
yeah, including me. Yeah.
And I should have mentioned this at the front too. So for the advisory committees, some of them have gone person by person with the candidates, and some other ones have just said, what are the top ones that have stuck out to each person, and then looked for kind of consensus of those ones that have stuck out. So,
Okay.
but that's really not a specific format you have to follow. So you do have some flexibility with this process too.
I have a question, and you may or may not know the answer. I'm just curious to know, when did this candidate or this applicant graduate with her degree? Because the year is not stated in her resume. She graduated from Friends University with a family therapy degree. She's got 15 years experience as a therapist. Just curious as to, does anyone know?
What's her last name?
Siebel, Diane Siebel. Is that her full last name?
S-I-E?
Yes.
E-I.
E-I.
Seibel.
Mary, I had a question.
Oh.
I know, kind of just with my role, some people, like a small handful of people on this list, I just don't want my bias, like my bias to sway. Like one of them was a student that I had in the program. One is a placement site mentor.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm like, how much? Yeah.
Well, I think, my opinion would be, you can obviously, recuse yourself from any discussion about it. I also think that sometimes that's a helpful tool, is to have information. I understand that position that puts you in. If the information is, positive, negative, or neutral, that can factor into things. But I think if any of us knew people that we, let's say, for example, would not recommend, I know that's a difficult conversation, but I think it could be important for the advisory committee to know, does this person have the professional integrity? Do they have the capability and the skills? If you knew something like that, I think it would be helpful to our process. And I would just like to say, I would prefer to keep a small number of nominations and not fill us up to 10. My experience on any advisory committee and on boards is if you get too many people, it actually sort of limits the ability to work and get things done. I certainly would take your opinions on that as well. But so I would hopefully we could narrow it down to a few of these candidates.
I'm just imagining trying to schedule. That would be a nightmare in itself.
And you all are so great. So we've got a good rhythm going. So we'll have to figure out how that happens. But
Yeah, just a comment.
please.
So the advisory committee right now has 7 members. So quorum essentially would be 1 over half, which would be 4. So with the 2 members absent today, we would just need to make sure that we have 4 people supporting. If you wanted to make a recommendation today on any applicants, you would need 4 people supporting them. Now you could wait until the June meeting if you wanted to do that. If that would be necessary to have more members present, so that wouldn't be an issue. But since we have just 1 above that number right now, just kind of wanted to highlight that so we don't run into that issue if we get to recommendations and because of recusals, we don't have enough people to support those. So
Sure, thank you.
I have the graduation date as 2004.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Leslie knows all.
I just have a database.
Okay,
I was
would
gonna say
our
thank you
group,
as well, Jardine, so. Leslie.
Well, you do too.
so So it doesn't really feel like I didn't hear anything that would keep us from wanting to endorse Diane. So
I don't have any strong negative feelings. I think something that stood out is the addition of the addictions perspective, which I wonder how much of her identity might be in that world, since she works at Pathways versus MFT world. Just something I thought about, but I think without like a rubric or something, it's really hard to have a meaningful opinion, I feel like.
yeah, I agree.
Were you going to say something, Joyce? Sorry.
No.
Okay.
You.
Okay. Is this methodology working? Now, David has given me sort of a different thought of, should we go with, is there anyone that stood out in terms of wanting to put the recommendation in? I don't want to switch gears on a method that worked for my head this morning. I'm flexible enough to see if the committee wants to tackle this a little bit differently.
Like give our top 3 or just keep going one by one?
Sure, I think that might be. Leslie, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with the other advisory committee members not being present, are you going to have to go back through this same process again in June because they're going to need to give their input?
Well, from my perspective, we had quorum and they had opportunity to review the resumes. So they could have like I said, the feedback I received from Jim was, gosh, too bad no one's from Western Kansas. Okay. So I feel like there was opportunity. I think this group can decide if we want to bring our top candidates back or if we want to just close the loop.
Thank you. I didn't know.
I'm pretty open to that, but I always feel like the people had opportunity to review the material and couldn't attend the meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I just was wondering if that was going to have to be repeated. So that's perfect. Thank you.
I would just say I was interested in Scott's resume because of the military experience as well. Again, don't know anything about this person, but that did catch my attention. There's been a lot of attention on military, provided he's actually not in Kentucky.
Yeah, and I should comment on that too. So I have his address listed in Kentucky in the database. It does say that he was, I think, former U.S. Army chaplain. So I think maybe he's moved a little bit. And the other advisory committees, they have had applicants who have applied that were not Kansas residents, at least when they applied for advisory committee consideration. And they did ask me, do you have to live in Kansas to be on the advisory committee? And so this may be something the board would want to really discuss at a future point, but the statutes say that board members have to be Kansas residents, but the advisory committee policy says that the policies that apply to board members should apply to advisory committee members, but the statute is not a policy. So the expectations of board members that talks about things like the ethical standards and other things that apply to board members, that doesn't say anything about board members have to be Kansas residents. It's in the statutes and it's not in the policies. So I know that's a little kind of confusing, but basically there's not a specific rule in the expectations for board members document that says advisory committee members have to be Kansas residents.
I think we have Missouri. Sorry to interrupt you, David. I thought you finished. We have Missouri residents that are board member or advisory committee members, just so you know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it is something to weigh, I think, in terms of the different things to weigh in the process. But there's nothing specifically that says someone who lives out of state can't serve on the advisory committees. So.
That would be very strange for me to have somebody who's not a Kansas resident to be on an advisory committee because we serve Kansans. So I'm not too sure that what the rationale is around that, not not really just keeping it to Kansas residents. And Scott, yes, he seems like he has 2 jobs right now. On his resume, he lists his residence as Indiana, or his address as Indiana. And then he's got 2 present positions, one in Kentucky and one in Indiana. So I'm not too sure where he lives.
Yeah, on his Psychology Today page, his practice is located in Kentucky, but he's licensed in 6 different states,
I saw that.
Kansas included. Yeah. So yeah, if I guess for me, this would be a person that I would say we could pass on, just because of not being connected enough to the needs of Kansans.
I'm in support of that, Jardine.
I agree with that too.
I do too. And I liked the military background, but yeah.
Okay. So we have out of the group, Eric, Julia, Melanie, Nicole. Is there a standout there? On my tentative list, I have Chris and Marcy and Diana as considerations.
My tentative top 3 were Chris, Marcy. I liked Eric's location and his clinical background. And I've worked with him before through friends, and he's been really easy to work with. And then I kind of had Diane and Nicole tied as my 4th because of their experience. And I kind of like that Nicole was out in touch. An agency. I'm trying to think now who represents agency. Jardine represents agency, and who else is on agency?
I suppose technically that would be me.
Oh, Mary, oh my God. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. I've got several hats. It's fine.
I always think of you as
It's good. All good. Yeah, that's fair. I know Erica as well, a little bit, not closely. So I haven't had much work with him, but what I know of his work has been good.
I will say I was a little disappointed in Eric's letter of interest. I didn't feel like he really painted a picture of why, other than maybe somebody asked me to do this, so I'm doing it. But I didn't really get I felt like in some of the other letters, at least after they talked about their accolades, they at least shared this is what I think I could bring to the advisory committee. And I felt like that was lacking in his letter. So because I don't know him or haven't worked with him, I have a hard time of knowing what he's going to contribute for us.
Sure, fair.
I don't know any of these candidates. I'm trying to figure out and guess their identity, racial identity, cultural identity, and I don't know. I just don't know. So I wish that was something we knew so that we can have some representation on the board, given that both Rebecca and I, who represent minority groups, are stepping out. Melanie, she is from, I think, just outside Winfield. I looked at the map, just outside Wichita. So she represents, I don't know what that area, I don't know if it's just a suburb of Wichita or that indeed is a more sparsely populated area.
I think she practices here in Wichita.
In Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any people of color that have applied, but I could be.
I don't think so. I've been trying to Google people for the last few minutes. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Which again might be a reason to maybe nominate the open positions now and then come back even for next June and see if we can increase our diversity. I think that needs to be very top of mind for all of us, particularly when we're losing two people who represent other ethnicities and backgrounds, and it feels very important. So I would think we could put that out for discussion as well. And David, I don't know if there's any way to determine that information.
Well, and kind of to that point, I just wanted to let everyone know when we sent the letter out to all licensees, we made an effort to include the new language on diversity of the advisory committee in the message to all licensees. So we talked a little bit about describing the advisory committee positions. And then it said, when considering applicants, the advisory committee members will work to ensure there is diverse representation on the advisory committee, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. And then talking about the levels of licensing and public and private practitioners and educators. So I think unless someone volunteers that information, I'm not sure what we could do, but I did want you all to know that that was something that we put into the letter so that applicants would know that we were looking to try to include those as factors when evaluating candidates. So they were told the advisory committees would be trying to weigh those as factors in this consideration.
Yeah, and I've even had some people who personally just reached out to find out more about the committee, and I referred them to look at the BSRB and that kind of thing. But those were underrepresented people, but they didn't put their name in. So I think there is interest that maybe didn't get into this in this time frame. Would the committee, do we have a preference on recommending maybe 2 or 3 with that in mind, that we could do this again and hopefully broaden the advisory committee? Is there an opinion?
I would say I think we've been clear that we want to continue the university representation. So to me, those are an easy to continue. So I don't think we had anyone else other than Chris that was specifically from Friends. We had applicants who were students at Friends in the past, but not admin, right? Okay. So, I mean, those two would be obvious choices if we're dead set on continuing to have both programs represented. Which, yes, I understand that contradicts what I said earlier. However, I was answering Mary's question.
Thank you for answering my question, Judy.
Yes.
Do we just need to?
Go ahead, Judy. Sorry.
Do we just need 2 to replace Rebecca and I at this point?
I mean, that's the minimum. Yes, we need to replace the 2 of you.
Then could we just do that too, and then do the extension of the board later?
I'm very comfortable with that. What does everyone else think? Unless there's someone that you're really seeing in this group that stands out that you want to move on.
Yeah, I would like to maybe consider a 3rd person. And now I have too many screens and I can't find
I was gonna
the people. Where did they go?
I was gonna look up more
Here they
on
are.
Julia too.
Yeah, I was kind of leaning that direction of it might be nice to have a 3rd person that is more an agency, maybe can bring like an agency.
Yeah.
Maybe private practice, just a little bit since, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, like personally, Nicole Eitzen, but I've worked with her professionally through CMHC work. I think she's a stellar individual, and she's really risen in her career at the CMHC, which is really not common to see that kind of progression so quickly.
And she's out in Hutch, which is,
Yeah, and I would say probably her CMHC is more on like it's more forward thinking, maybe not quite the cutting edge, but they're approaching. I feel like they're a little bit more forward thinking of an agency, which I know we've been talking a lot about, kind of trying to move some of our practices forward and things like that. So she might have good insight or good addition to those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I think she could bring a lot to the committee or board. Mhm.
Rebecca, what about you?
Yeah, I think for a third member, for me, it would be, I feel like Nicole or Eric would be a good addition.
Okay. I think it would be great if someone wanted to go ahead and make a recommendation that we look at 3 spots at this point, with the understanding that we might want to diversify our committee next year. And if someone would want to put forth Chris, Marcy, and Nicole as our candidates recommendation. Can I get a so moved somewhere?
Sure, I can move. So it's moving a motion to nominate. Well, is this a nomination? Recommendation for 3 candidates, new candidates for the advisory committee. Chris Haben, Marcy Lechtenberg, and Nicole Eitzen.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. And any opposed, same sign. Okay, great. That is wonderful. Thank you all so much for that. It's actually, there is a little bit of awkwardness in kind of looking at resumes in this way, anyway. So I appreciate everyone's good work in there. Okay, we'll go back to the agenda, which I just lost here on my screen. Into our next item of business, we had asked to take a review of the unprofessional conduct standard or regulation and see if there were any additions or changes or things that stood out. I know I have a couple of things, and so I can start there, or certainly don't want to go line by line with our regulation. The things that I've been thinking about are documentation. Many of the other professions have unprofessional regulation language around documentation quality standards and timeliness, including timeliness and comprehensiveness. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up. I also wanted to consider WMFT's standard for engaging in sexual activity with former clients is never, and the Kansas standard is 24 months. However, that is fairly consistent across the other disciplines as well. I sort of checked that 24-month marker, but that's something I wanted to bring up to this committee for consideration and discussion. Those were the 2 things that stood out to me that I felt like were lacking, but like to just kind of hear other comments or questions or.
Well, and Mary, this is my mistake. There is actually another regulation that is specific for unprofessional conduct regarding record keeping. So I really should have pulled that along with this primary one on unprofessional conduct. It's
okay.
102-5-16. So it does have to do with some record keeping unprofessional conduct language on that. So
is there a reason why it's not incorporated as unprofessional conduct?
That's a good question. Leslie, do you know if that was added after, or is there a reason why it might be in a separate regulation?
I'm not sure why it was separated out.
I mean, the other, when I looked at the other professions, it was embedded in their unprofessional conduct. And so if we feel like that enhances anything, then I guess we could discuss that.
And that might, I mean, if that's something that you might want to do to move them over, that might avoid some potential confusion if someone's looking at unprofessional conduct and they look primarily at that regulation and they don't see the other one. That would be something that could be done.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? I'm looking at that separate standard.
I do agree that it's confusing that they're not in the same place. So yeah, I would definitely hope that we could recommend to have them all in one, to move 16 up to 12 and have it all in one place.
I'm curious, is there, what's the most common thing that has been found to be crossed or violated?
Well, I think, you know, my experience in practice, not with BSRB necessarily, but in practice, I think people tend to not understand the really, you know, we talk about it as an ethical responsibility for timeliness of comprehensive documentation. From the CRC perspective, we have had complaints come in about people who have either inadequately, insufficiently documented service, erroneously documented service. So we see those things come in, and I guess the question for me is, you know, why not be part of the unprofessional conduct standard, even though it says unprofessional conduct regarding record keeping? But I think a lot of those, Rebecca, are what we see. So it sounds like we, without understanding any history of why that might have been separated, we would be in support of sort of pulling that information into the full unprofessional standards conduct, unprofessional conduct standard. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
I know, I don't like know the history behind, sorry, I'm trying to figure out which number goes under which letter, under which number. Well, it's on page 2, and it's discriminating against any client, student, or supervisee on the basis of color, race, gender, religion, national origin, or disability. And I don't know if we want to put in like sexual orientation and gender identity. I'm trying to remember if that, I just don't know what I'm stepping into, because I don't know if Kansas has any, anyways, I don't know if that's an option.
Yeah, I agree with that, because this is not comprehensive and it doesn't reflect AMFT statements, especially what AMFT recently announced. I don't know if any one of you have seen that from them yet.
The clinical treatment guidelines is what you're referencing, I think.
I share that because it would be nice to have that really spelled out, because of sometimes what we've noticed when we're training therapists.
David, is there any anything that would keep the advisory committee from making a regulatory change on this if a similar thing wasn't endorsed as, kind of Kansas legislature?
No, there's a lot more flexibility when it comes to regulation changes, at least currently. There is an item that will be on the ballot this fall that might change some of the regulatory process, but in general, we have a lot more flexibility to have different regulations by profession, and those don't get approved by the legislature. They have some oversight, so we bring them before them and answer questions, but it's a different process, so they wouldn't have to match up with other professions. But just to let you know, that you're the second advisory committee that has met to talk about these unprofessional conduct regulations. At the meetings in February, I asked all of the advisory committees to review them and then think about possible changes. And so when the professional counselor advisory committee met last week, one thing they talked about was wanting to collect some more information from outside sources, potentially maybe surrounding states, to see a little bit about what unprofessional conduct regulations they have, so we can compare and see, not necessarily that we should adopt those, but for reference. And then if there is anything from maybe the National Association on some of these things, getting some guidance on that too. So if that's something you're interested in as well, I could go ahead and pull those for a future meeting too. I do think it might be helpful to go ahead and have this be a continuing conversation this year, and then go ahead and make changes at the end of the year after you've had conversation on these things.
Yeah, thank you for that note. I think many of us in this room are familiar with AAMFT standards, and I think those are always sort of in the back of our mind when it comes to Kansas specific regulation. I am very supportive of what you're talking about, Rebecca. So I think we should keep that as a suggestion to keep going back to. Did anyone have any comment on my thought about the sexual activity with sexual advances with former clients? It is fairly standard. Again, I've seen the 24 months across the disciplines. That regulation was changed for AAMFT a few years ago. Any thoughts there?
Mary, when I read that, there's like different levels there, just in number 26 itself, right? So exercising undue influence over any person, that to me is, if making sexual advances toward engaging in physical intimacies, that takes on kind of a different meaning to me as well. So I'm trying to, piece that, take it piece by piece. And so even just the idea of that itself, I'm trying to understand why that's all put in the same sentence anyway. So is that what you were thinking as well? Or are you more focused on the time frame, the 24 months?
I do think to your point is right. It's sort of muddy. And it seems like it could be much clearer.
Yes.
And also the 24 months to me is a problem. I just can't ever see how you would not be exercising undue influence on someone you've had a therapeutic relationship with, and then at some point decided it was sexual. And I think about this again with the experience on the complaint review committee, when you see those incidents happen, but that 24-month mark has been hit, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and to me, that's
agree.
a crime. Sorry,
Yeah.
Joyce. Yeah, so go ahead.
I agree. Yeah, sorry. I agree that it does not make sense to have a time limit. I think you should not, because your client, even after 24 months, could come back and need your help. And if, to do no harm to your client, to me, is to be available for your client. And there's no time limit on that. And if the relationship turns into sexual after 24 months, your client who's dependent on you for help cannot seek that type of help they need from you. And it is two things in that particular statement. Undue influence and sexual advances, I think they're two different things. So I agree with you, Leslie. And if they can be in the same sentence, I don't have a problem with that if that 24 months was removed.
I'm putting a sort of a note for further discussion on maybe looking at the language of those two items, 25 and 26, and also the time period for a matter of future discussion as well. Sort of how I'm putting that in my notes. As another kind of item, again, I thought about the things that have become problematic for people at this point, and I wondered if we should begin to address electronic means or social media or interaction with clients on that format. And I don't know, that could probably get and again, this might be where we resource other states and see if they're making any moves in this direction. But I do think there is a slippery slope for people in this area. I didn't know what the thoughts were about that. If we agree that should be a topic or not a topic on the unprofessional standards.
My first thought was that it might be easier to say what's not okay versus what is okay. And so maybe it has a place in unprofessional conduct to have a social media online relationship piece there, or interaction piece.
There is some new language for the LPCs in their unprofessional conduct regulation, if you'd like to see that.
Yes, that would
Maybe we can send it for your next meeting.
that would be great. That would be great.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Joyce.
I think it's a little, I totally agree. I don't think we should be communicating with our clients on social media. However, oftentimes it's unintentional and unavoidable. Like, for instance, I have a Facebook page, and although I don't put much on it, the people, my friends on Facebook, know my clients, and I can see that because they're commenting or they're wishing happy birthday to the same person, and I'm not in contact with them in the sense that I don't send a message, they don't send me messages. But if they wanted to, they could see my page. If I wanted to, I could see their page because we have mutual friends. So it's to what level do we police that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think my thoughts were around the intentional and how people portray themselves. Maybe in as professionals, we have some responsibility to uphold ourselves in a certain way. So that's a consideration. And then also just that, and I really am thinking intentional. That's why I'm curious about this language for the LPCs, where there's obviously just a lack of regard for that, not what you're talking about, which, I mean, we're all connected at this point, I think, in some way. And we certainly wouldn't want people to be put upon or to be disciplined in any way because of those relationships. So it's just something that, again, for me, I think about in terms of unprofessional conduct, what could happen.
So are you thinking of perhaps how they portray themselves on their personal pages?
I think if there's an intersection, I think we need to be mindful of, just like you're talking about, it's very difficult for people to separate professional and personal profiles and pages. And I think there's some conversation in there that can be had. I don't know that I have a full formed recommendation or thought, more of a discussion that I'd like to get everyone's feel and sense of. You know, I don't want to, my goal would not be to regulate to the point where we're doing, you know, social media searches on people, but there are times where I think people's use of social media can be harmful to their clients or public.
It sort of makes me think about maybe speaking to like people who might be promoting like maybe like things that would be unbecoming of an MFT or don't fit within like the, I don't even know, like the purview of an MFT. Like that might be a place where you could kind of speak to that, or, you know, different kinds of extremism, but under the umbrella, or like I'm promoting this as a marriage and family therapist. I'm saying this is the truth. Like I could see that maybe being, because I agree with Joyce. I think we can't get deep in the weeds in terms of who you can and can't be connected with online, because to Mary's point, we're all connected. But there might be other organizations that have thought about how do we handle people who might be promoting their membership in our club and things that don't fit with how we operate as a unit. So I think it's worth a discussion, and we might find that it's too complex and we don't want to touch it, but I think it's worth discussion.
And a couple things that came to mind as you're talking, and again, these are private groups, but private groups are really, how private are they? But where there's even sometimes bad mouthing of other professionals, and that that doesn't have a place in professional standards. And again, I could be going way down a path. I get it. But there's just so many elements. I think we should address it as part of our conversation, as you said, whether or not we do anything with it. That could be a separate thing, but I think we should talk about it. I'd love to hear perspectives on what you all see and think in this area.
Well, and I was thinking there's a lot of privacy settings, you know, in all of the social media, and you can never protect yourself 100% because we are all connected. And it goes back to our own professional conduct, right? If we see something, we have to take care of it ourselves and not be friends with our clients and you know, in those regards. But you know, the other part of it, and I know I'm going down a different path again here, so bear with me, but another side of it is we, as maybe the BSRB, need to maybe be educating or encouraging other companies or colleges or whomever to educate on these topics as well. And it's probably already happening, but I think promoting that in some way, I think that's important too, not just on this top level, but at the lower levels where we can be proactive and trying to educate those that are coming up into the professions, of course.
I don't know if it's been updated, but in 2016, the Association of Marital and Family Therapy Regulatory Boards put out a teletherapy guidelines. And there's a small section regarding social media presence. And it has to do with kind of this distinct line between professional and personal. I'm happy to send it. I think it could be helpful. I also just peeked at the WMFT best practices for online practice with couple and family therapy, and there's probably less in there that's helpful for this, but I think the AMFTRB might be helpful.
Yeah, Rebecca, if you could send that to me, I can go ahead and keep a copy, and then I can forward that to the rest of the advisory committee members.
I'm gonna do a quick search because I don't know if it's been updated. I don't know. So
I want to go back to Mary's comment about bad mouthing other therapists. I don't have any experience or do I know if that's happening, but I could see that that could happen even with, and I was wondering whether there could be something in our guidelines as to reiterating that it's the responsibility for the board in terms of taking disciplinary action. So if we know of, identify, witness unprofessionalism in colleagues, that it should be a report that's made to the board, not necessarily something not something they need to handle on their own. Maybe it's already in the guidelines, I don't know.
And I think that's, I mean, to your point, really, the complaint review committee can't really manage or monitor anything that isn't in these regulations or, or statutes. So it's, if we want to be able to address something from the BSRB standpoint, it would have to be something that is a violation or a part of this. So that's the only way we can help in that way. Although I do think we circle back sometimes to this idea of what's the role of education in the BSRB and advisory committees, and some interesting conversations there for sure.
The role of the workplace, and that too, right? Because that's where it has to take place right now, because we don't have that ability to address those concerns.
So it sounds like I think we could have some good discussion, and we'll pull some resources together for the next meeting. Are there any other things that stand out here that we want to include on our, at least the short list or near conversation on these? I'm really appreciative of this, because what it speaks to me is the evolution. We're all really taking what's happening in the world and what's happening in our environment and making sure that we're addressing it at this level. So it makes me very proud.
I appreciate your work on this topic too. I think I mentioned before that the legislature is keeping an eye on agencies reviewing your regulations. And so I really appreciate your work on this, because I like to inform them that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we're looking at the timeliness and looking at the language and making sure that we're keeping our statutes and regulations up to date. So.
Okay, any other comments before we go to our next agenda item?
I am going to forward the new clinical guidelines on affirmative care from AMFT, just so that everybody has it. I'm sure some of you have seen it. So that might be something that we want to consider in terms of language to add into our guidelines.
Okay. And if you want to just forward that to me, then I can save a copy of it and send it out to everyone, if that would work better. So.
Okay. We'll move on to next agenda item, which was brought to the advisory committee by one of our members here, and it was the BSRB Social Work Clinical Supervision Manual. So Jardine wanted to touch base on this and just talk about this work that group had done, as we talk about, how we want to conduct supervision, good supervision. They had put this work on the manual, and I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at that. I've looked at it several times, and just wanted to, actually, Jardine, I'll hand it to you and kind of give you the floor in terms of what you'd really like us to address today.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so my hope in bringing this to the advisory committee was really just to get feedback on, was this something that we would like to consider doing? I know I'm thinking about my own experience as a newly approved supervisor and having kind of a succinct place to be able to go to get information and to be able to reference for my supervisees, I think would be helpful. I know we've kind of talked about sort of the limitations of the board. And so I know we have to be mindful of what we're putting out in terms of what supervisors can or shouldn't do. But I really liked the way that they kind of just pulled everything together into a guide that would be nice to send. Like once someone receives their approved supervisor designation, it'd be nice to send them that congratulations email with this as an attachment, so they have it as a reference. So yeah, I was just wanting the group to consider that, and yeah, that's it.
And to provide a little background on this document, this was before my time, so I did ask Leslie a little bit about it and Joan a little bit about it. But this was a product of the Social Work Advisory Committee. It was a subcommittee of that advisory committee. And I believe they worked on it for a little over a year, trying to pull all the content and arrange it in a way that would be helpful. So, so that was the work of that subcommittee that put that together. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just in the last few days, like looking at the regs, they're not great. So yeah, in terms of how they're laid out, that's the issue. It's hard to find what you need. And so if we could sort of make it easier to find exactly what I'm concerned about, I can go and read and get my question answered. I think that would really help us provide better supervision.
I think, Dave, is this possibly some things that the board's going to be looking at, is making any of those changes that would possibly change that manual in any way? With how supervision is conducted and the different telehealth policies and in that regard, would that change that document? Do you think, that manual?
Yes, I believe it will, because it'll change the regulations.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Leslie, I should have asked you.
Sorry, Dave.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're very right. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so Jardine, I think there might be changes also, but I see where you're coming from for sure. I think that's a necessity in all of the professions, in my opinion. But moving forward, just to let you know, I think that's some work that the board's going to do that might change that will change that manual. So that might be something in the future that you'll be working on as a committee anyway. So
I think it's a great idea to have a supervision manual. I might not be here to help with that. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is an area we can keep coming back to, is what resources we can provide to help people on that path of supervision. And the Social Work Advisory Group did a great job. And luckily for us, if we take this on, we have a great template to work from. Based on what you're saying, Leslie, and just time frame, would you recommend that the advisory committee hold for a little bit before creating a subcommittee to work on this? Or what is your thinking based on what you're saying time-wise?
Leslie, Seawester or Allen?
Seawester.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's up to you all as a committee. I just think that there's some work that's going to be done, and it's going to change that manual. So if you use the social work supervision manual, you might be making changes anyway. So I would say table it. If you wanted my opinion, I would say wait on that to make any further decisions on that.
Okay. Leslie Allen, do you know time frame on some of the substantial changes?
No, the regulations are either with the Division of Budget or Department of Administration.
Okay.
So we really don't then they'll go to the AG's office, and I know they're understaffed. So it'll be a little bit, at least. And then there's the 60-day public comment period. So I would say at least 3 or 4 months. And that's probably being generous.
So perhaps we put this on our what would be August timeframe agenda, because what I can see happening then is we could at least start maybe form a committee, especially with having some new members, and see who'd like to take on the heavy lift of this. I'm hearing, Jardine, that we have full support in looking at this and adopting a very similar manual. I don't think there's anyone who's disagreeing with that. I think it's a good approach for us, and I agree, like, give the letter and here's a resource for you. I think that makes so much sense.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Moving on, we had the pre-approved providers for continuing education. I know this is a conversation we've been having or had previously. Leslie Allen, did you want to step in here at all?
Dave, did you send the regulation?
I did. I sent a copy of 102-2-4B.
The one with the changes?
Just the one that's currently posted on the website.
Oh, okay. This is actually the regulation change, the regulation that you guys made changes to at the last meeting. And hold on a sec.
Okay, 102 to 4B.
Oh.
Okay, got it. Lots of attachments to this meeting.
Hold on. I'm sorry, it's not where I thought it was. I had made the changes with the language that I had made the language changes that you had made, and that we were just going to bring it back, but the wrong, I didn't send Dave the regulation to send to you. So,
well, and Leslie, I believe I want to make sure we're on the same topic here. So the board had asked different advisory committees to discuss if they wanted to have pre-approved continuing education hours for their professions.
sorry, I'm doing the wrong one.
So
I
currently,
actually was on the wrong one too, Leslie. So I was with you all the way, 100%.
Good, I'm glad.
I can
Which is
frame
so
this.
awkward because we were both on the wrong thing.
Yeah, the board had asked, currently the social work profession, you have pre-approved providers and of continuing education hours. You can be applied to the board to get a status as a pre-approved provider, and then you can note that when you provide continuing education courses. It is only offered currently for the social work profession. That is the group of licensees that had requested it, the advisory committee in the past. But there was discussion at board meetings recently about would the other professions like to have this pre-approved status for continuing education providers. And so it was going to be a topic of discussion for the advisory committees. And
Yeah, thank you.
and Leslie, did you have anything else you wanted to say about the regulation in that context?
Oh, just that it's optional, it's not required. And when it was done in years ago, the other professions chose not to be a part of it. But the social workers felt it was important.
I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Just one more comment. Sorry. From our perspective with the agency, it does take more work up front to review those applications to be a pre-approved provider. But when individuals are pulled for audits, it can make that process go a little quicker when those continuing education courses are reviewed if they're from a pre-approved provider. So.
Yeah. And I'll speak from an organization who has a pre-approved provider status for social work, and where the limits are is we can only advertise that social work CEUs are approved. We also, our formation of our committee has to have a licensed social worker on that. And what I would like this group to advise on is, I mean, why wouldn't we want that for MFTs? Why wouldn't we want to? MFTs are always like, is this pre-approved? It only says it's approved for social workers. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to not only to do both things. And I feel very strongly that we should move forward with this. I think it enhances our profession. People don't have to question the CEUs, and it allows provider groups who want to provide CEUs to have an MFT on that committee versus having a social worker.
I'm in favor of that. Yeah, I don't see any downsides to it, especially since it seems like in looking at this, the work that you have to put in up front to get approved, to me, if there are people out there doing mediocre to poor work, they're not going to put all this energy into getting pre-approved. So
it's also, you know, Dave talked about the time involved. I know Misty spends an awful lot of her time on the phone with people saying, well, would this count? Would that count? And we can't say if it will count if it's not pre-approved because we haven't seen the information yet. So it would save time on that as well.
I think it's a great idea, especially for those looking for CEUs, and it will reduce their hunting, the time they use. But however, who is going to approve these? Who's going to be reviewing the content of the training and approve that? Would that be the advisory board, or would that be a subcommittee? Because that in itself would be a lot of work.
Currently, it's just done by staff. I don't know if that would change or not.
Yeah, and currently there's two different methods. So for the social work profession, you can apply to have one course be pre-approved. So you can apply for a single course to be pre-approved, or separately, you could apply for pre-approved status as a CE provider. So you could be deemed a pre-approved provider for continuing education by the BSRB. So you can either do it for one particular course or generally to be a provider of CEs.
Yeah, and in this example, my agency is the pre-approved provider. So we have some criteria we have to meet, you know, in terms of getting speaker CVs and getting objectives and surveys, so that when we do a report to the BSRB on our outcomes and our education offerings and our meetings and all of those things. So we sort of take that in-house and then report to the BSRB on our renewal.
Okay. Is there anyone that looks at the content of the training at all, like the curriculum, or is that not something that's scrutinized so closely?
It's not scrutinized by a social worker. It's just done by staff. Now, I will say, if there are questions, if there's any hesitancy in what we're looking at, we send it to a board member.
But we do the initial review of those things in-house here at the BSRB.
Okay, so are we in favor of adding this for MFTs as well? Okay, could I get a motion that we move that forward?
Well, I just have one more.
Yeah, sure.
Well, concern, I guess, not necessarily a question, is that So there is some quality control, it sounds like, but not an in-depth scrutiny of the content. So we're not accrediting the courses. Does BSRB really want to put, or this advisory committee really want to put their name behind those CEUs if they've not been scrutinized or approved? And what if, we probably could trust some, as Jodine said, if they put in the effort to seek approval, chances are they're serious in providing quality CEUs. However, that might not be true for everyone who puts this in. So do we know what we're sanctioning? Do we know what we're telling the public that these are, really good providers and quality, you get quality training? Is there a risk there that just that might be a bit of a risk to do that without really doing a thorough evaluation?
I think I answer that again. Full disclosure, my organization does this, and we're a pre-approved provider. And we have to get, again, the CV of the speaker, the objectives, what the outcomes of the session will be. And, and again, report that in our continuing providership and audit of those things. So it shifts the responsibility to the quality of the program to, I think, the provider, to make sure that we're sort of fulfilling these standards of what the activity is. So I guess, that's my perspective coming from, but the only thing we can put out there, we have it actually for the Board of Nursing and we have it under social work. So, but we don't have it, we can't say these are approved for MFTs. We can't say that. I don't know if that helps or not, Joyce.
Yes, that does help. Thank you.
And that's as the providership, and as David mentioned, there's another way, which is the single send in for approval, which I think would help, again, where social works knows, they know right away, yes, I can take this and it's approved. MFTs are doing the phone calling saying, I don't know if I can take this or if this is going to qualify for my continuing education. So is there consensus that we want to move forward with this for MFTs?
Yes, and moving it forward would mean that we could see the language that was drafted up, and then maybe we'd have time to think about it some more and ask more questions potentially.
Yes. Okay. Very good. We'll again bring that to the next meeting then. Our agendas are filling up for the next few meetings.
Forever.
I know, we're a busy group. Okay, so I'll take a pause there, just in interest of the time. It's 11:55. We might push the training for advisory committee members to the meeting after we elect new, or not after new committee members would be approved. So that could be the August timeframe meeting. I'd like to discuss next meeting. We would normally meet in the June 10th would be the week we'd meet. I will be at a national conference and will be unavailable. So I'd like to discuss alternate Fridays that month, either before or after.
I would vote for after that because I will be away at a conference as well. So I'm glad I'm glad you won't be available. Makes that easy.
So you're sort of endorsing June 17th.
17th, and that is the week. Yes, I am totally fine with June 17th.
That works for me.
Rebecca?
I could do the 17th as well. And I apologize, I have to hop off and do a webinar, so.
Oh,
But yeah, that works.
okay, good to see you.
Bye, guys.
Leslie Seawester.
Hey, Mary, can I,
That
oh,
works,
sorry.
Mary. You're okay.
That's okay.
That works.
Mary, can I ask, for that August meeting, is it possible for us to just put the training on the agenda and nothing else so we can do it?
Sure. If that's what we want, then we would put the manual to the next meeting. Absolutely.
Because I feel like we just never have time for that training. And so I feel like we need to just only schedule it. And then unless there's some emergent issue that we absolutely can't push, then we just only do that training for that meeting. And I think timing it to after the new people come on in August would make the most sense. That way we're all getting that training together.
I agree with Jardine. I think it's important. I think, I don't know when's the last time that we had the training on this
It hasn't been a
committee.
year yet. Yeah.
Okay, so David and I talked about it and we changed the format of it. So it's not the one that you had with Jan in our legal department. So it is much different and it's very condensed. So I don't think it's going to require the full advisory committee, like the 2 hours or anything like that, just so you all know. I think it's much condensed and there's a lot of reading left or information provided to the actual advisory committee member because we're all professionals. We leave some of that to, give to them. So they have that as a reference as well. David, is that good enough?
Yeah,
Okay.
I highlight a number of different topics and then reference things so people can read a little bit more. But the previous training took about an hour and a half, and I can cut it down to about 45 minutes. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was imagining an hour and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
You
pushed
remember
David
it.
for 30, just so you know, because I'm like that. I'm like, oh, I think we can do it in 30, right?
Yeah.
But yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and David and I did talk about sort of timing it to where we have new people coming in. And really, because we had just done that training, I felt pretty okay with pushing it off a little bit just because we had just had the training. So, but August would be our earmarked, and maybe we could just intentionally have a smaller agenda for that meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of the next meeting date, I think there might be an advisory committee already meeting on.
I wanted
June
to ask.
Yeah, the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee usually meets on that third Friday. So they meet quarterly, so it's a little bit different with their scheduling, but I think it would be on that June 17th date. So I could go ahead and send out a doodle poll to you guys to see when you're available, if that would help. But
That works.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, is there anything else for today? Well, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn. But before that, just thank you all so much for your work here. It's a great committee. I enjoy it very much.
Well, thank you, Mary and David, for all your organization, and Leslie as well. I move to adjourn.
A second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Have a great
Bye,
weekend.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
here.